Okay, I think it's really fitting that a creepy robotic voice from Zoom just kicked this off with a recording in progress. James Poulos, how are you, man?
Isaac, I'm well. How are you?
Doing very well. I'm really looking forward to this. I don't know you personally, but I have heard your name floating around for quite a while. And in recent months, I've been following you on Twitter and then more recently Twitch. And I've seen this book that you're coming out with, which is just dropped today on Canonic, called Human Forever. And I've been very, very intrigued. I'm like, I think I have sort of an idea of what your main thesis is, kind of, but I haven't actually looked into it. So that's what I'm really excited to be able to dive in here and chat with you about.
Let's do it.
Okay, give us first. Let's start with the book, and then we'll kind of work backwards and get a little backfilling on your own story. Give me the elevator pitch synopsis. What is Human Forever about? Let me read the subtitle. It's Human Forever, the digital politics of spiritual war. That's so intriguing. Give me the elevator pitch on the book.
All right. So we created these digital devices that everyone is now very familiar with. Some of them are visible hardware. Some of them are invisible, flying through the air, passing through our bodies, our buildings, capable of doing things that until a few years ago were really only considered to be the province of angels and demons. So we've created these tremendous technologies. They've really swallowed the world. They rule the world in a way that no person or group of people can any longer rule the world. And this is a big shock. The people who created these devices really expected them to complete or consummate their globalizing form of rule coming out of the Cold War. They really thought that it was going to be a slam dunk sometime around election night 2016. And in fact, their predictions and their expectations were quite wrong. They were shocked to discover that these tools are being used by people in their own ways. That people with wrong opinions on the internet were organizing and sharing and broadcasting their wrong opinions. And what they realized is they actually didn't have the level of control, and the level of determinacy that they thought that they did. And so, we've seen since then, but even, a ways before then, a string of sort of embarrassing failures and reversals among the ruling factions in the globalized West, ranging from, total failure to predict something like the Arab Spring and how that went down, to the many embarrassments that Five Eyes has experienced in terms of leaks and breaches and data being just sort of lifted and carried away by the Chinese government, among others. The financial crisis, it's been a long train of oopsies. And we're now at a sort of inflection point where the folks in charge are saying, if we're going to remain in power, we need to figure out a real way. We need to get it right this time. Figure out how to take control of all of these devices so that we can remain sort of global governors, participators in global governance. That turns out to be a very ambitious undertaking. And in order to pull that off, basically what they need to do is they need to master the form that digital technology takes, which is the form of the swarm. 5G means that we have basically zero latency. And so, we've got basically an infinity of these devices already. And if they can all communicate with each other, if they're all connected together instantaneously, we are really just stepping out of human space-time. And so, if you were a member of, one of the factions that is wielding rule in the West right now, your game plan is basically to master those machines and through those machines to master us. And the way that cashes out, I would argue, is really to just onboard everyone into what I call a cyborg vivarium. A place where, what is expected of you in order to get good social credit points and not to lose social credit points is really to merge your consciousness increasingly with digital technology, and to do so according to rules set by regulators and governors from on high. That's at odds with Americans' way of life. It's at odds with our form of government. And it's not just Americans who feel this way. You look at the viral pictures of people sort of mobbing in the town squares of various cities across the West, protesting lockdowns and vaccine mandates. Why are they doing this? They're not doing this because they're afraid of medical science or whatever. They're doing it because they understand on some gut level that what we're experiencing is an attempt to transform politics, transform our identity, and transform our way of life by the folks in charge. And so we're experiencing a digital civil war right now, and that the nature of that war is a spiritual war. The power and the scope of this technology raises fundamental questions about who we are, why we should remain that way, what's so good about being human after all, and how can we flourish under those conditions. A lot of people these days are saying, actually, humanity sucks. God is dead. There's no soul. Humanity sucks. Math is everything. And that's a choice, but I don't think it's a choice that's going to end in utopia. I don't think it's going to turn us into gods. I don't think it's going to turn us into bugs. I think we're stuck being human, and that's not bad news. So now is the time for us to figure out how to preserve our humanity by getting our hands back on the controls of the most powerful digital technology, such as Bitcoin, which we can talk about. And that's what this book is designed to help people understand.
Man, I love you've got me all fired up, because you're navigating the reality that we observe and placing it in a theoretical frame that doesn't err on either side. I would say doesn't fall prey to what's really tempting to do. It's to either be black pilled, so to speak, and be like, the evil, whether it's political masters or demonic forces or whatever, they control everything. We're moving into some dystopian Black Mirror hellscape. It's all horrible. There's nothing to do about it. It's just gonna, it's nowhere to go but down. A very dark message. And it's very easy to go that direction, even for someone like me, who's like a relentless optimist since early 2020. It's kind of been like, oh my gosh, things are way worse than I thought. And you don't have that frame. You have this very optimistic pro-human thing, but you also don't have in sort of saying, hey, this is something to be resisted. And these sort of powers that be, they're not winning. They're stumbling around too. They're doing a lot of stupid stuff. They got blindsided by the positive elements of technology. You're not taking it in a Luddite direction either and saying smash, the solution is to smash technology, and technology is 100% alienating. Humans should never innovate. We should still be living at some subsistence level, or as I heard one person say one time, like the minute a human first looked at an animal as a food source, that was the day that everything became corrupt. It's like how far back are you going to go to get pure, to cleanse our hands of all this horrible technology? That seems like a very anti-human approach. But so does the sort of Ray Kurzweil, just plug your brain into the cloud, and either abandoning our humanity for technology as some sort of salvific thing. That seems very dark and scary to me. And you seem to not present that as the solution. But smashing all technology to go live back in caves also seems anti-human. Humans are wired for progress and for tinkering and for innovating and for making tools. And it's not a bad thing, but there's a danger in there. So anyway, I feel like you're navigating that in a really interesting way. I guess, first, let me ask you, how would you define they, the people that are attempting to sort of create a technocracy, or to say, look, this technology kind of got out of the bag, so to speak, and is, we were surprised by things like Arab Spring and some of these things that have happened very much because of, or in alignment with, technological advancements. Who is behind that? Who would you consider that sort of, for lack of a better term, the enemy? The people that wants to put you in some kind of technocracy?
Well, again, I mean, I think it's clear when you open the box sort of what's inside and why that's a problem. But you don't have to be a sort of nefarious lizard person communicating with, the spirits of dead Martians from 1,000,000 BC in order to, have
that's a lot more interesting, though. I like that. I like that, at least as a metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are nefarious people at all levels of life and in all walks of life, and you shouldn't be shocked if you encounter them in your daily life. You shouldn't be shocked if you encounter them in the upper echelons of power.
Right? Like,
hey, human beings.
Yeah.
Human beings are imperfect. We are errant and we go astray, and that frustrates a lot of people. People don't like to be told no. They don't like the thought that we have limits, and they don't like the thought that we're stuck with imperfection. That desperation for purity that you mentioned, is a very old, Gnostic heresy that weaves through pretty much every Western religion, every denomination. No one is safe from the Gnostic temptation, which is basically, that through knowledge we can purify the spirit within and break the control of nature of our flawed bodies and emerge into purity. So you have, you really, I mean, I talk about this in terms of like three types of optimism. So type one is the kind of optimism in humanity that we associate with like John Lennon, right? Or like the United Nations, where it's like we'll all come together, and if we just abandon our ancient hatreds, if we forget what makes us bad, then we can sort of have a clean slate and we can be pure. If we turn against memory and we idolize the imagination is the key to achieving perfection. Then there's a second kind of optimism, which is the people who are optimistic in humanity didn't pay attention to reality. They didn't recognize how flawed human beings are and how easily they forgot that, when push comes to shove, oftentimes we just massacre dozens of millions of each other. And, a lot of people are really just kind of ugly and stupid, and there's inbreeding, and, we can't count on human beings to save human beings after all. And so therefore we need to create technologies that can save us. If we really just, turn against all of the things that make people all too human, then we can pour all of our resources into, sort of creating these mechanical gods that can run our societies for us in a way that's better and more predictable and more complete than how we can do ourselves. And if with luck and a little bit of hard work, maybe we can even create machines that become gateways to divinity for us. So you've got this kind of optimism in technology, but that itself is, I think, denies reality in an important respect. You got all these guys out there, whether they're waving the math signs at the Andrew Yang rally, or whether they're Bertrand Russell acolytes, and they really believe that like we can do this, guys. We can create what Umberto Eco called the search for the perfect language, right? That we can create a programming language that is so deterministic.
A story in the Bible. Some loose parallels here.
Yeah, there are a few stories, and they really think that like Norbert Wiener was wrong, that technology is not like a monkey's paw, that if you really just get the smart in the room together, smartest people on the planet, they can build a sort of cosmic computer that will give us an escape path from all that sucks about being human, all that we feel resentful toward. And in fact, if you just take a cursory look at something like quantum astrophysics, what you discover is if you like tunnel down into looking for the foundations of math, there's not some rationalistic substratum there. There's no substrate like that. It's actually like, oh wow, like this particle can actually exist on the other end of the universe at the same time in ways that we can't really measure or understand. We can just kind of glimpse it, and that's just one example. So I think that worship of math, idolatry toward math, really just leads you to turn into a snake eating its own tail. And so what are we left with if over-optimism in humanity doesn't work and over-optimism in technology doesn't work? And that's kind of one corner of the civil war we're experiencing. You got wokies on one side who say, no, the only way that we can make technology pure is by putting the right ethicists in charge. We need woke czars in charge of everything. That's the only way we can redeem this technology. And then you got techies on the other side who say like, well, we would accept wokeness as long as ultimately it's the math guys in charge. And they're fighting over this, cyborg vivarium that's being constructed. But I would suggest that the best option, really the only option if you want to remain human, is a third kind of optimism, which says, look, we are inherently flawed. We do have limits. We are incarnate and souled beings, and we're not gods and we're not bugs. And we're kind of like, we've been given this status and this identity, and there's still so much that we can do with it. And the wisdom of the ages that we have inherited is not something that needs to be forgotten. And putting ourselves at the mercy of our imaginations, we know that leads to disastrous outcomes. We know that utopianism and dystopianism are both dangerous, and that both sidetrack us from reality and spin us oftentimes into these dream cycles from which there is no escape. So the kind of optimism that I that I want to offer is one that says, look, there's so much catastrophe mongering, so many people every day you wake up and it's like this crisis, that crisis. You have to face the crisis. We're all in this together, and our fate rises and falls on our ability to just like solve all of these crises. The crisis has already happened. The digital catastrophe has already happened. everyone's kind of a cyborg now. We all have smartphones. They're not going away. We're not going to like EMP each other into the Stone Age and start over again. Probably. I, can't see the future, but we don't need to do that either. What we need to do is we need to remember who we are. We need to reconcile ourselves with the gift of our humanity, and we need to reassert control over technology in our space-time that protects and defends and advances our human way of life. This is what every civilization state in the world is doing right now, if they can. The Chinese are obviously doing this with the Great Firewall and trying to make their robots Taoist. The Russians are doing this. Their response to the digital catastrophe was to build an enormous military cathedral outside of Moscow that looks like it sort of landed from a far off galaxy in 2048. The Israelis, the Indians, all figuring out ways to sort of exercise sovereign control over the technology within their space-time by reaching down to the most fundamental, unique resources of their civilization, which in all those cases is ultimately a religious one. And so in the West, where you have like much more religious factionalism, religious conflict, you see a power struggle going on. The Vatican is involved, the British Crown is involved, the Hungarians are trying to do some stuff. And then of course, in the US, things are intense. Things are intense right now because people are starting to realize what the stakes are. And the big challenge for us is to recognize that America has always been at bottom a pretty pluralistic place. Moderated in some ways, but you got these different folkways, these different groups of people. That's not something that you can wipe away by just herding everyone into one cyborg vivarium to rule them all. The graft will not take. I don't know if you saw the latest the Venom sequel, right? Where
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, okay. So like Venom has to like fight his kind of like his nemesis spawned from his own sort of molecular blobs or whatever. And so the monster that is created that he has to battle against inhabits Woody Harrelson's body. Venom inhabits Tom Hardy's body. I'm not going to take the exegesis much farther than this, but like for Venom, it's like the graft, the sort of interstellar amoeba blob thing. For comic book reasons, the graft takes with Tom Hardy's body, so they can live in kind of like it's not always hearts and flowers, but it's a sustainable relationship. Whereas the Carnage and Woody Harrelson graft doesn't take; they're not complementary. And so if the people in charge are trying to turn the U.S. into a host body for a sort of woke social credit system, the graft is not going to take, and that is why we're in the conflict that we're in right now.
I was thinking of in the show Arrested Development, graft versus host disease, where where the character does hair implants, and the doctor tells him, "Your body's not rejecting the implant is rejecting your body, and it's slowly killing him." As you're talking, I'm totally getting why you use the sort of pro-human, team human. This is human. That you are humanity, that you are advocating, what is uniquely human. Because it's funny, as you're going, I've been on a very interesting or very, sort of parallel intellectual journey over the last several years around a lot of these same themes. And just, I keep coming back to like the real crisis, the real problem at all times is always just the problem of being human, which is that humans are both material and spiritual beings, and trying to have that united identity, like that is the human problem. That's the gift, that's the burden, that's the source of the wonder and the pain, right? It's that combination. And I think it's interesting, you kind of look, historically, you have these two different ways of trying to deal with that problem, trying to pick one or the other. You have the sort of Gnosticism, which is like, well, all the material parts are dirty and they're bad, and let's escape into a spiritual, and that has very different variations, just, tripping on mushrooms or whatever. There's all kinds of different, that kind of fall under that category of, well, the material part's all phony, it's all fake, it's all corrupt. Let's just get lost in the spirit realm. And then the material version is sort of like, we escape through the material. Like today, that might be manifest ad. We literally leave the planet and go to the moon and settle on them, because like if we can escape, we can use materiality to escape all these horrible religious and sort of spiritual ideas that have corrupted people. what's interesting about the world today, the sides that you described, the way you sort of laid it out in your book, which is similar, but it's not exactly the same, of the sort of woke type saying, hey, let's enter John Lennon world of a realm of pure imagination, like Willy Wonka. Uh, and let's just, sort of be better, have better ideas, and forget all of the traditions and hatreds and concepts and categories and definitions that cause conflict. And then the sort of technocratic, well, let's just let math solve the problem. What's weird about those is neither of them are particularly overtly spiritual. Like there's almost like a materialism or like at least an agnosticism or an atheism woven into, even though it's about sort of becoming new types of people, a new man, as the Marxist might say, on the sort of social justice side, it's very like, it is spiritual, I think, but it's not overtly spiritual. It's almost unknowingly spiritual. I don't know. I'm curious your take on that, because I see both of those sides as trying to both be materialist, even though they're not necessarily doing a very good job. And I think part of that is why a growing number of people, especially younger people, are not attracted to either of those. And there is this kind of resurgent interest in tradition and traditional religion and something that, it has more of a spiritual component. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, the phenomenon of these technologies is forcing people into a confrontation with the reality of our human identity. I mean, I think, many of us have heard for a long time the catchphrase "spiritual but not religious." And that, that used to make some sense. Well, organized religion, it's not what it used to be. And aren't they all just pedos? And like, you just go in there and they're speaking some language you don't understand. And it's a 2-hour ceremony. And like, is the wafer really Jesus? I mean, you can't be serious. All these sort of criticisms, but people not wanting to go full, Sam Harris or Steven Pinker or whatever.
Even Sam Harris is into like transcendental meditation these days, right?
Well, right. And, you look at a guy like Yuval Harari, and, his great teacher was a sort of meditation guru whose view was that Buddhism was science. And so these people have been trying to kind of have it both ways for a long time. But the idea that like there's a sustainable spiritualism for people who don't believe that they have souls is now creaking under the pressure of this world that we have created. Is the body sacred? Is the soul real? These are questions that are now not escapable. And there are going to be different answers to these questions. And different civilizations are going to pose different answers and stake their coherence and their sanity and their survival on those different answers. And so, I mean, definitely, I, like many people, have strongly held opinions and beliefs and convictions about these things. But the time when you could imagine one basket of doctrines taking over the world, that time's over. And if we do not recognize this, then the spiritual war is going to become, a shooting war, or worse, a violent digital war, which we have not really seen. But at the end of the day, look, you don't have to be a Christian to believe in the soul. I mean, just ask, one of the world's other major religions, or even ask Aristotle. Aristotle was very practical about these things. Look, there's anima. It's the sort of the breath of life that goes through the living organism. But even more so, he said that the soul is the formal cause of the creature, of the being. And that's the kind of thing that is not a religious doctrine, and one that just makes the heads of so many math people who just soy face at math, makes their heads explode, and not in the way they want. But these kinds of insights, these kinds of perceptions and sensibilities are flooding back into the realm of consciousness. And it's a hard change for people to make. And a lot of people, they haven't been prepared. They haven't been educated to make this change. They still think that like, well, if my normie fantasies are collapsing in this new world, then I guess that just means I need extreme fantasies. And maybe I can just hunker down in those and survive the great disenchantment. And just flip through TikTok for a minute, and you see I mean, it's one thing to sort of like be proud of the way that you like to have sex or whatever, but it's that is becoming like a vehicle for people to try to escape their humanity and to like become this kind of protean blob of possibility that can be assembled into a swarm, that they can lose their sort of individual identity into this swarm in imitation of our digital devices and entities. These kinds of transformations. You just look at something like like transsexualism, right? And it's like back in 1998 when the Wachowskis were still men. The whole concept of like I'm changing my biological sex just had a different valence to it than it does today. When today what it is you're not really changing your sex, you are becoming a cyborg, and it's the most powerful first step that people can take and that people understand into completely sort of breaking the hold of their natural bodies on their identity, so that they can ostensibly elevate into some higher form. I mean, you can see this in the way that like it took maybe a year or two for trans to get their stripe on the woke flag and to move way up to the very top of the stack of the woke hierarchy. I mean, these things are happening because of the independent formative impact influence that digital technology has on us. And the sooner that we're cognizant of this, the easier it's going to be for us to pass through this filter and preserve our humanity.
And it's so interesting when you used a phrase something like people are sort of becoming a protean blob of possibility, rather than kind of a concrete, distinct thing, or avoiding a tight category or something like that. It's so that they can have they can be all these possibilities. And that resonated with me because for the last decade, my work has primarily been with young people getting started on their careers. And just in the career space, I have noticed this trend that has only escalated, where there's like almost like a fetishization or idolization of theoretical possibilities at the expense of concrete opportunities. So like options, well, I want to have all these options. I could do anything, I could be anything. And then you're like, great, here is an actual opportunity right now. Someone's willing to pay you to do this thing that you say you're really interested in. And there is a terror of facing that, because the minute you say yes to a concrete opportunity, your opportunity cost is all these theoretical things that you could be doing. And so there's this like crazy tendency to stay completely unemployed and do nothing, because when you're doing nothing, you could theoretically be doing anything. But if you're doing content marketing for one specific company, well, there you go. That's all you're doing. Now you're defined as something. And that's terrifying to people. It's really interesting. I mean, I've literally seen people describe to me their dream job, get it offered to them, and turn it down, not because they don't like it, not because they have some other concrete opportunity that's better, but because the thought of becoming something concrete, even for a few years of time, is more scary than to continue to have this possibility cloud of what potentially they could do, even though they're not doing any of it. And I always was really struggling with that, but I think you're pointing that there's that goes much deeper. There's something happening where people are kind of looking to almost escape elements of identity that are, or of humanity that are built into nature, and trying to break those limits because they feel constrained by them or something. Am I touching on a related phenomenon?
Yeah, 100%. It is a little complicated in the following sense. You're right. It's crazy to see the value of a dream job in people's minds becoming the dream more than the job. At the same time, like, when you do have a resurgence of religious sensibility that is caused by these conditions that we're in now, what you see is a shift in the soul toward renunciation as a mode of life. Asceticism has a long and storied tradition, and it's not always just sort of going to sit on a pillar in the middle of the desert or wearing a hair shirt or, sort of praying until your knees bleed. I mean, there are other ways that you can do this, and the monastic tradition is a good example of this. I think, whether it's still very small, but the lying flat movement in China is an example of this, where you got these Chinese guys who are like, I am totally insignificant. I am being asked to dedicate my life to productive labor. Why should I bother? Why shouldn't I just be like Diogenes and like lay in bed and let my consciousness roam free? Um, Many Americans, don't need to be told what the acronym NEAT stands for, because they are NEETs and they're proud of it. Like, why should I work at Chipotle when I can just like be my true self on the internet?
What does the acronym stand for? Maybe I'm out of touch.
So it's no education, employment, or training.
Okay, got it.
All right. So you sort of like, it's like the vol cell of being like redundant
Yep.
socioeconomically. And so under these conditions, it is natural and to be expected that more and more people will say things like, you know what? I don't want to have ambitions. I don't want to climb the ladder. I don't want to join the rat race. I might not even want to have children. I might not even want to have a pet. What would be unnatural is for those people to say, what I do want to do is I want to become an avatar in the metaverse and inhabit this kind of, this entity that, I mean, I looked at the sort of Facebook teaser for Meta, and it's like these avatars have no bodies below where their navel should be, but they obviously have no navels, no genitalia, no legs. They're just sort of these like floating sort of entities. I mean, this is a profound deremption, a break from the most simple and primal characteristics of being a human being. What would be more natural is to say, like, we need to gather together in religious communities and spend all of our time basically, laboring just to feed ourselves and worshiping God. This has been going on for thousands of years. I think that it's going to continue, and it's not just going to be, Dominicans and Franciscans. I would not be surprised at all if something akin to woke monasteries developed. I would not be surprised at all if something like Bitcoin monasteries developed. Where guys who really just like, hey, I'm really smart. I'm pretty spurgy. I don't really care about sex. I don't really want to reproduce my offspring. I want to build something that is monumental and sacred and, maybe permanent, maybe not, but something that can outlast my existence or the existence of anyone in my family. That is a deep-seated longing within the human heart. And Bitcoin blockchain provides people who feel that with a way of participating constructively in the creation and maintenance of culture. You can really create religious monuments, religious institutions in that way, without having to bow to Bezos or to the Federal Reserve or to a woke commissar who's going to delete you because you like used the wrong word today. There's a lot of possibility there, and I think there's there are many paths that someone can take to remain human and to protect and defend our humanity. And some of those, I think, are going to be ways of renunciation on the internet.
What you mentioned, a digital war. What would a digital war look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, Exhibit A, Christopher Steele, right? Like, who's that guy? Is he just like a retired British spy who Fusion GPS tossed a few bucks to his like business intelligence consultancy to draft a memo on Donald Trump's like dirty laundry that then became a pretext for a federal investigation that caused what is that all about? And it's like, well, and this is just one example, Christopher Steele was the guy who ran the Russia desk for MI6 during the financial crisis. So, if John le Carré has any credibility as a guy who spent basically his entire life in spy world, hanging out with people and getting like cool stories for his novels, and and wanting to prove some points obliquely, but wanted to to shine a spotlight on stuff. He was quite forthright, toward the end of his life, maybe 10 years ago or so, that he was convinced that the more or less the British financial system was bailed out during the financial crisis, not by the Federal Reserve, not by the Bank of England, but by the Russian mob, which is probably one of the very few places that you could get liquid capital in the volume that you needed to prevent the Royal Bank of Scotland from going down the toilet and tanking the British financial system in about 48 hours. Speculative, yes, but welcome to Spy World. Welcome to Five Eyes. The GCHQ and the NSA are basically one organization, U.S. and UK intelligence, operating as more or less a sovereign entity. Is this consistent with America's form of government? Like, that's an interesting question. But all these gray areas are becoming battlegrounds right now. If you look at what global Britain wants, if you look at what the Biden administration wants, if you look at what's going on in Canada and Australia and New Zealand with all the lockdowns, vaccine passports, they are clearly trying to move the West in an unprecedented direction, and they're trying to do so quickly, and they're trying to do so with much less control over the system than they thought they had. That is bound to create conflict. It's clear that the US and the UK have adversaries around the world. There was a bet made by the Western elite that they could get rich off of pumping money into China faster than China could get rich off of money being pumped into China. That bet didn't pay off. China won. And Chinese influence is continuing to expand throughout the world as a result. And the reality is, with digital technology, it's just easier to do offense than defense. This has been the Achilles heel for our intelligence agencies. I mean, I think they've done some really nasty, rotten stuff that is inconsistent with their constitutional obligations to our regime. But the flip side of this is, a lot of these folks are just good people who have a brain in their head, and they're trying really hard not to lose the intelligence war to Russia and China and others. And that war is primarily played out digitally because, at least so far, people are unwilling and unable to get into a conventional confrontation for good reason, I would argue. So that stuff's playing out, and those aren't the only powers involved. I mean, you just look at what Emmanuel Macron is doing. Like, he's always looking for an edge. He and others in Europe are conscious that if Europe doesn't have its own independent sort of civilizational answer to taking control of AI and digital technology within its borders, then it's just going to become a client of someone else's internet. It's compute or be computed. And that's why Bitcoin is so important, is because it gives ordinary people the ability right now to take some control over, I think, the most powerful defensive digital weapon. One that allows them to create culture, exchange it, value it, share it, make it memorable, and make it profitable. And to do so, on that permanent ledger, telling a database what to do. If ordinary Americans, can't tell databases what to do, if they're banned from mining crypto, or if they're banned from buying high-powered GPUs, then you are on the conveyor belt into the vivarium, and I don't think that's good enough for most Americans. I think they sense that this is where things are going. They're frustrated. They don't know what to do about it. But the reality is, you don't have to become sort of like you don't have to work at Google to understand how this stuff works. I was not as educated about this stuff as I am now, even just a couple of years ago. But the reality is, if you just take like a day or two out of every month, you can get up to speed pretty fast. And so, I published my book, Human Forever, at canonic.xyz onto the blockchain and for sale in Bitcoin. The NFTs, as of this conversation, the NFTs are selling. Price to sell at $600 a pop, because this is like how we demonstrate our worth. This is how we lead in the space. So you step into the market and you say, this isn't just I mean, no offense, but like a cartoon gorilla. This is like, you get a real book, you get the ability
no offense
to like,
taken, you're preaching to the choir here.
yeah, you get the ability to build something together that is impervious to attack by people who want you to be silent and compliant.
We're definitely going to come back to the Bitcoin thing in a minute here. Do you believe in evil?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's out there.
What is evil?
What is evil? This is like such a great pivot. I really appreciate you just like pivoting hard into the evil question. Evil is so look, the earliest myth or legend or story that is theological in the West is the war in heaven. is the spiritual war in heaven, and the desire by the most powerful of the angels to challenge God for divinity, not just for power, but for authority over all of creation, authority over the ability to create, not just the force of creation. China has a different sort of cosmological origin story, and that I think is one reason why China and the U.S. are so different and will remain so different for all of eternity, so long as there are human beings around. That insight, that uh, that the longing for divinity and the jealousy toward divinity, um, and the uh, sense of vengeance aroused by commandments, by a sacred no, by sacred limits. The insight that is something that is not just primal, but that exists even outside and above our given humanity, I think, is the key to understanding the nature of evil. Evil is not something that we came up with. It's not something that's unique to us. Um, and it is not something that we can master or defeat or make go away unaided.
Hmm. Tell me if this is too far out of scope. I don't know how much you get into sort of your metaphysics in the book or want to hear, but do you, what do you feel about the idea? Okay, so that's kind of, the mythical presentation of evil as a sort of impulse to defy the boundaries of reality or what the divine intelligence has set forth. Do you believe that there are spiritual entities or entities in other dimensions that we can't see that are a part of this war that you've described that's going on, this digital war and sometimes material wars? Do you see those as just sort of useful metaphors or as actual existing entities that we have to grapple with in some sense?
Well, your mileage may vary is always the caveat for stuff like this, but I think it is unquestionably within the mainstream, certainly of American public opinion, not just that there are sort of demons and angels in the biblical sense, but that there are entities. If you take too much DMT, you will encounter these things, and there are. I've read the trip records, and like it's just a fact of our situation. And you can ascribe to any number of religious beliefs in order to find a way, a path that will lead you to that kind of confrontation. For me, feeling the presence of evil was something that kicked in when I was quite young. Some people don't really feel it so much or run across it that much, but it's. I think Alexis de Tocqueville was right when he said that religion is the permanent state of mankind. And I think that it's you really have to try to shut down your own perceptions and experience as a human being, not to kind of encounter an awareness of a spiritual dimension of life, even if it's right here in our space and time. And in fact, many of the people who do make the attempt to completely shut down in that way, through the use of very powerful drugs, for example, in fact, make the other discovery, which is, wow, if I try to shut down my humanity, I rip holes in reality as we know it, and I experience the destruction of my soul, and it leads to insanity. And many of those people are lucky to sort of live to tell the tale, which oftentimes they do.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch. I mean, I grew up um, in a Christian tradition, and I've explored all various philosophical religious things, but I've never necessarily left that, at least in a sort of the basics of Christianity. But it's been very interesting for me to watch in the last few years. Many friends who have never been religious at all. Most of them were atheists, and then maybe they sort of softened a little bit and were like agnostic or somewhat atheistic. But in the last several years, it's been really interesting. I think it's a combination of seeing things like, like say all the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. Like, hey, there really are like child sex traffic rings involving very high, doing horrible, horrible things. And then you start to see all this, every government in the world in lockstep, lock everybody down starting in early 2020 and start doing these crazy things and doing things that were not just lies coming out of media and politicians, but so obvious that it wasn't like a mistake or just a little bit of bias snuck in. And I've watched a lot of friends suddenly say they started to look into various religious traditions and spirituality, not because they met God on the road to Emmaus or whatever, but because they got a glimpse of something demonic, something they said there isn't a natural explanation for some of the things that I see happening. There's some dark force at work here. There's some, it's like in Lord of the Rings when they see Theoden and he's not himself and he's doing stupid things. He's like, something is here. There's some influence here that goes beyond just political self-interest. It's been really interesting to see people sort of begin to search for the positive side of spiritual life because they were confronted with what they felt like was an undeniable existence of a spiritual darkness in the world. So it's been very interesting.
Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
tell me.
It was ever thus. I mean, people have been noticing. The noticers have been noticing this for forever, for a very long time. Cards on the table. Like this is what I believe right here. So your mileage may vary once again.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would want to note on this point is, as a Christian, and as I was working on this book, it was very significant to what it was that I discovered I really wanted to say, that when Jesus is talking to his disciples about the end times, what he says is, many people will claim that it is the end times when it is not. Many people will be out there sort of like telling you that now is the time to panic and it's all coming to an end, and it won't be. When I come back, you will know that it's me. There will not be like, oh, but is it the real Jesus? And most of all, he said, it's only going to happen at a time of God the Father's choosing. Not even I know when the end will come. That is not usually what you get out of the sort of apocalyptic religious narrative.
No.
And at a moment when every single day people log on and they are told by people who are richer than them, people who are smarter than them, people who, sometimes it's Bill Gates, but sometimes it's people who are considerably better looking than them, elites, quote unquote, saying it's over. Like, we should live in space. Like, you have to just eat mealworms, like, shrink down, like, humble yourself, like, don't leave your house, like, everything's dying. Even the Financial Times, there's an banner ad, like an internal banner ad running on the Financial Times. It's like, why should we go back to something that's not working anyway? It's like, what? Like, this is the Financial Times. And even guys like Bezos, you look at the top CEOs, with the partial exception of Elon Musk. Nobody seems to be having a good time being a CEO. Everyone wants to become a priest in the new cyborg theocracy. And that is telling. And what it is telling me is that, Christians and everyone else should take a deep breath and recognize that, there are good times, there are bad times. Sometimes we get ourselves into trouble and are deservedly punished by our arrogance and stupidity. But those aren't the end times. That's something much different. Plagues come and plagues go. Temperatures rise, temperatures fall. We can talk about sort of AGM and all that stuff, but like the apocalyptic mindset, really, if you listen to like Marshall McLuhan, he didn't say he was an optimist or a pessimist. He said he was an apocalypticist, meaning, an unveiler, someone who just kind of like puts his effort into trying to reveal what it is that already happened. That's a good apocalyptic mindset. And that looking at digital taking over the world as an apocalyptic event, not one that brought the end times upon us and just
Yeah.
destroyed the purpose of life, but something that dropped the scales from our eyes and threw open the curtain on what it is that we've really done. That's stunning. It's a gut check. It's perhaps a come to Jesus moment. It can be many things, but one thing that it isn't is the end times.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. As I said, I grew up Christian. I feel like the book of Revelation in particular, it's sort of like a Rorschach test. Like people just read into it whatever like whatever they bring to it, they interpret all of these wild things as, oh yeah, see, this is describing, this president or this, they want to specifically map it onto their situation and say this is telling us that we're right at the very end, which I think is a little bit misleading, perhaps a little dangerous, a little bit humorous. How did you get here? How did you end up writing this book? What brought you to this point? Give me a little bit of your backstory.
I mean, I will begin to out myself and date myself as being old enough to remember when Admiral Stockdale was in the one vice presidential debate when it was a three-way race between Bush, the elder, Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot. And Perot at that time was really at the peak of his powers. He was at about, I think, solid 25%, at least in the generic public opinion polls, and there was a real question as to whether he might actually be able to pull this thing out, or at least throw the election one way or the
Only
other.
time in my life a third party has ever even remotely been considered something threatening or viable.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that if you want to blame someone for us still not being rid of the Clintons, maybe it's Ross Perot you need to blame something to think about. But so it's first vice president, first and only, I think, vice presidential debate that year. And you had Admiral Stockdale there standing in the middle, a guy who had a very illustrious military career, but who's getting on in years, and he's standing there with this kind of half proud and half puzzled look on his face, trying to blink into the lights of the cameras, and it's finally his turn to speak, and he opens his mouth and he goes, "Who am I? Why am I here?" And that was the end. That was the end. His reputation was sealed. And really what he was trying to do is he was just trying to introduce himself to a national audience. And so now it is my turn. I must now drink of this bitter cup and say, who am I and why am I here? I'm half Greek on my father's side, really Spartan on my father's side. And I suppose that's fairly unusual and didn't count for much in America until somewhere around the current era, when suddenly you have all these guys in their 20s going like, yes, it is Sparta that is right, we must return, we need the Leonidan Republic and we can do this. And it's been a fascinating turn of events, and one that I certainly do not begrudge. Although, and I mentioned this a little bit in the book, I can say from history and from experience that even the mighty Spartans, even the Greeks, the glory of the glory and origin of Western civilization, have a very spotty track record. If you look over the centuries, it wasn't that long after Plato and Socrates that you get Alexander the Great sort of conquering, the quote unquote known world, looking pretty good, having all of his soldiers marry the Persian girls so that he can create a new Hellenic race. Made it all the way to Afghanistan. That sort of Greco-Afghan empire lasted for 300 years. So don't tell me this is the graveyard of empires. It's strategic incompetence. And then he dies. And suddenly there's a big civil war, and his various generals carve out different pieces of the empire. And the Ptolemies take the Egypt chunk of the empire, and they rule Egypt for 300 years, right up until Mark Antony. The problem is, over that period of time, they managed to slip from the heights of Greek civilization at its best and most virtuous, to the most depraved and degenerate form of institutionalized barbarism that was the Egyptian monarchical tradition. brothers and sisters marrying each other, having inbred offspring, worshiping themselves and one another as gods. By the end there, people think of Cleopatra as this great beauty, and like maybe she was, but the historical record clearly shows that like that family line was so genetically mutated. It was a hideous abomination. This was the last of those Ptolemaic pharaohs. The family tree had become a Gordian knot, which Alexander had to cut through the actual Gordian knot if the legend is true. And Rome came along and had to cut through that knot, and so it came to an end, the glory that was Greece. So, so as someone who was raised quite culturally Greek, and yet raised Christian at the same time, I like to think that I kind of developed a functioning set of both kind of pride in all that entailed, and also an awareness of how easily even the very best human arrangements can slide off their axis and become mutated parodies of themselves. Long story short, PhD in government, not political science, at Georgetown, because that's how they do things at Georgetown.
Well, you were right in the belly of the beast there. That government program at Georgetown. Some people there that will end up trying to wield the ring of power.
Yes, in many such cases. I'd started a blog waiting for my grad school apps to come in. That turned out to be a good idea, kind of perversely, but very amusing. That kind of, I was in my mid to late 20s and enrolled in DC, and turned out that there were maybe about 100 guys and girls who are kind of chasing after the same biscuit at that time. And they all sort of went on to become fixtures of the mainstream media. And, there was a time when that felt very exciting and significant, and that time has passed. So I get my PhD in hand at long last. And then 2016 happens, and I'd done a book on Alexis de Tocqueville, as I mentioned, called The Art of Being Free. The gist of that book was, hey, if you read Tocqueville along with some other 19th century theorists of democracy, I'm thinking Emerson, Benjamin Constant, Friedrich Nietzsche, what you discover is they all kind of accept or admit or fret over the way that democratic life makes people crazy. Makes them maybe not clinically insane, maybe not need to be institutionalized, but it applies certain kinds of strains and pressures on the spirit, on the soul, that people are not necessarily going to be naturally inclined to deal with in a healthy and stable way, and which therefore pose significant new challenges to statesmen. And so my wager with that book was that if I argued that, hey, we're kind of stuck with this craziness, but there are ways within that culture to actually reinforce and maintain our sanity and move forward together in friendship, that would be a message that people would be willing to listen to and maybe reflect on. And there were some, but I did this book through one of the big five, which I guess technically are now probably more like a big two, publishing company. You get the book agent in New York and the editor in New York and New York. And, they did a fine job. It was just poof, my book appeared in every Barnes and Noble in the known universe. And that was great. But at the end of the day, in spite of the fact that I was able to call in a lot of favors and get the interview in the Washington Post and yada yada, did the book sell? Was it a runaway success? No, it was not. Did it create the kind of illusion of success so that everyone thought that I was doing really well? Yes, it did. And at the end of that process, doing the book tour, having the book parties, going to Austin, book people or whatever it is, sort of like checking all the boxes, felt pretty good until I got home. I hadn't been working for a couple months, and like not in the liberating sense. The fridge was full of rotten food. I was exhausted and I was out of ideas. And just the thought of like, well, back to work, back to having more ideas, like, keep whipping the mule until it dies. and I felt like the mule was starting to fade, starting to experience organ failure. Um, and shortly thereafter, book came out in inauguration weekend of the Trump years, and watching what was unfolding with Trump and in the Trump years, and sort of staring down the barrel of like, am I really going to just have to become a sort of ideas festival of my own in order to make it in this world? Maybe not a dark night of the soul, but it was one of those moments where I could feel that things were changing in a direction that made it seem as if most Americans were going like, no, we do not want to be sane. We do not want to like learn about friendship and become, sort of rediscover the art of friendship and freedom. No, we want to be crazy. We want to form mobs. We want to spiral, and we don't understand anything anymore. We just know that we don't like it. And so I thought, okay, if as a political theorist, a doctor of political theory, I do not have anything to say about how technology is causing people to choose or to feel forced to go in the wrong direction, then academic political theory probably deserves to die the same death as every other irrelevant and obsolete academic subfield that there is. And this was
It
before
may still need to die that death, but go ahead.
it may
Your book
can't do it
accepted, of
myself.
course.
Yes, of course. No, there's some good folks like that, but people are like, oh, how did wokeness take over so fast? And it's like, well, because all these disciplines have nothing to say about what the frick is going on. That is how wokeness took over so fast. And under digital conditions, all these medieval patterns of thought and feeling come back, and the medieval origins of the university are rearing their head once again. Anyway, so long story short, too late. I thought, gosh, I need to actually sort of beginner's mind this and just learn media theory and learn, sort of understand what digital really is and how it developed and who was involved and who are the thinkers. And so I was a fellow at that time, a sort of baby fellow at the Center for the Study of Digital Life. There's a guy who runs it called Mark Stallman. He's sort of a zealot of tech, going back from taking AOL public all the way up to present day. And he's a big McLuhan guy. And so I kind of started with Marshall McLuhan and worked my way through the corpus. After 3 or 4 years, I felt like I was able to say something helpful, of significance, and that kind of the public mind had sort of moved in a direction that would be more receptive. But I also felt an urgency. It was summer. The sort of lockdowns in LA had finally come to an end, summer of this year. And I kind of secured a 3-week sabbatical at my job, and wanted to write something that I could get out into the bloodstream very quickly, not wait for an editor and an agent and a publishing house to say like, oh, you can't use that word, or like, oh, you need to make sure that you add this or that. I found that to be hostile to not just intellectual freedom, but to the life of the mind and to the power and authority of human communication. And so I was able to sort of write this thing in a very compressed time frame, kept it under 300 pages. Canonic had gotten to a point where the model was proven, and it just it just made a lot of sense to do it that way. And I couldn't be happier with how this is launching and what it's demonstrating. It's the medium is the message with this book.
Yeah, so we'll end with a little discussion about the launch on Canonic, but one final topic before we do. Bitcoin, you mentioned a little bit before. I'm curious why. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I mean, I'm a fan of Bitcoin, or at least what I believe Bitcoin is capable of being, if not necessarily what it predominantly is today. Why do you see Bitcoin as a powerful, positive tool for sort of the human side and the things that you're talking about, rather than one of the dangers, or maybe it's both, but on the sort of technocratic side? Because the idea of a global, immutable public, although you can encrypt some things, but largely it's public ledger, where all bits of data are potentially connected to economic exchanges, and all of that is trackable and traceable. There is a version of that that sounds like a technocrat's wet dream, like a panopticon sort of technology. Why do you see in Bitcoin something liberating and something powerful for humanity?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. This is Vitalik Buterin refers to Ethereum, at least his ambition for it, as one computer for the whole world. I think Bitcoin got there first. I think that is why, Wall Street wants it to be just another asset class that goes right into their portfolio. I think like the Salesforce vision of Bitcoin is one where it is not used by ordinary people to create and value memorable culture that they use to protect and defend their agency as citizens and as human beings and family members, community. That is not the design that the institutional bigwigs have in mind for Bitcoin, because they see that this technology, which is already out there, is one that is capable of serving as the plumbing for a world system of I don't even know if governance is the right word anymore for what that would be. And so there's kind of a paradox here, which is this technology is not God. It is not an idol. We should not worship it. We should not fall on our knees and go, we created something better than we could ever be. We must placate it and try to, that is not the right approach. It is more like plumbing than it is like a God. But at the same time, just because it is more like plumbing doesn't mean that it's neutral in some cosmological sense. It's not neutral. Like digital technology wants interoperability. And human beings do not want to be interoperable. We want to be incommensurable. Yeah, sometimes we like being part of a crowd or a mass or a mob. I've been to Coachella more than once. Like, I get it. But we like having it both ways. We like, when the craziness is over, we can sort of go home and be back in our beds and be ourselves again. Digital devices don't think that way. They do not care when they experience life in the swarm because they have no individual identity, and they're not even conscious. And all these people who think that we can upload our consciousness into the machines can't even explain what human consciousness is. So the technology itself universalizes itself, but it doesn't universalize the people who use the technology, because the nature of this technology is to make people sort of confront the fundamental questions of human identity that we know are not going to consolidate under one single set of answers anymore. So there are some paradoxes here. And what we need to remember is that freedom emerges from order, not the other way around. I don't make the rules. Like, don't come crying to me. Like, this is just the way that it is. We have to just deal with it. And so the importance of Bitcoin is not simply that it allows us to do cool stuff, even though it does, or even that it allows us to resist control by people who disagree with us, although it can do that. But simply that it is I think the most powerful digital technology. And that if ordinary people do not get their hands on it and start slapping around the hash, telling compute what to do, if you are not computing, you are being computed. And if you are not controlling the database and telling the database what to do, then you are in someone else's database being told what to do. So as much choice architecture as Bitcoin opens up, I think we really don't have a choice but to get our hands on this thing before it is used for purposes that are contrary to human identity and human existence. That said, Westerners, Americans, Anglophone people in charge are headed for a painful end if they think that by taking control of Bitcoin, they can rule the world. Talk to China, talk to India, talk to Russia, talk to Israel, even some Europeans. It ain't going to happen. And so, there's reason for a resurgence in human pride here in the salutary sense, but there's also, a resurgence of humility is a big part of it too.
Mm.
We face a daunting challenge that will take, centuries to get our arms around and to prove our mettle within. Leadership is about stepping up to that challenge and, giving your offspring something to remember and something to tell their offspring about. So let's do this.
Man, I love that whole segment there, your breakdown of Bitcoin, because it's a very difficult thing, especially on like social media or whatever, to present the idea that one is both optimistic about the power and possibility, and even the current reality of something like Bitcoin, while also pointing out how absurd it is to be like, oh, you just put laser eyes on and you buy and you hold, and that's it. Then we win. And every time the price goes up, that means that humanity is winning and freedom is winning. And like that, to point out the absurdity of some of those ideas while also not being, someone who thinks Bitcoin is doomed to fail or bad, is not particularly easy in a soundbite world. But I think in just a couple minutes there, you did a really good job on a high level of kind of presenting the fullness there and the nuance to it. It's fire that humans, hey, now we have this tool. You can run away and be scared of it, but it's probably going to burn you, or someone's going to find a way to turn it into, firearms and control you. Or you can try to master it and utilize it as a tool, and even maybe use it as a defense against those who try to come and oppress you. It's both of those things at the same time. It's all of that. It's a massive disruption. The cat is out of the bag, and it can be utilized in phenomenal ways, in dangerous ways. But running and hiding from it is not necessarily the solution, or just assuming that it's all good or it's all bad is a bit naive as well. So let's end here. Canonic. So you launched your book on canonic.xyz, which is on Bitcoin. It's on the Bitcoin SV blockchain. And I think this is so cool. You're kind of doing the bit. So I've some of the books that I previously published, I just put up the digital version on Canonic just for fun. And then I published one book exclusively on Canonic as a physical book with just 100 copies, and you buy the NFT and then you can redeem it. But you did something really interesting. You kind of are getting the best of both worlds here, from my understanding. You are releasing an NFT, 100 copies, and it literally went live like less than an hour before we started this. And when we started, you had already sold about half of the copies. So who knows if there are any left, but you're selling physical, like really beautiful, high quality, like leather bound, limited edition, like 100 of these signed by you, along with an NFT that comes with an early release digital version of the book. And those are $600 a piece. So you sort of get that the people who really want not only the content of the book, but what it means that the book is out, what it means that it's out at this time, what it means that it's published on Bitcoin. Maybe they're fans of you. There's several sort of collector components in there. So you get to carve off that market, but then you are going to do a later mass paperback release for sort of the general public. I think that is a really, really interesting sort of tiered approach of like a select special edition, and then you have this sort of broader thing. What made you choose Canonic and choose this approach to publishing the book?
Yeah, well, it was an easy choice with Canonic just because it was ready. I could use it right now to do what I wanted. And
yeah, I tested it early for you, and we worked out the kinks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, like you kind of go, if your friend hands you the tool that you need, you've used the tool, and it's really just that simple for me. You can go into all these kinds of abstruse discussions about which coin is better than what coin and what the use cases are, and no. And, I'm not going to slap someone across the face if they try to have that conversation. But I think, like, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, if you can do what you feel called upon to do and demonstrate something to people that you feel like really needs to be demonstrated, and you can do it right now, do it.
Yes.
So that was my use case. I'm glad that you appreciate the tiered thing. I think I poked some gentle fun at our cartoon gorilla NFT community out there. it's kind of ridiculous in one sense, but in another sense, like ridiculous is not always bad, not
People
inherently.
are playing around with something
People are
new,
playing
and
around,
yeah,
and the reality is that NFTs are not just like trading cards; they're also like VIP passes. And I think the way in which NFTs can be used to create um, an exclusive community of opt-in, fellow travelers or super fans or allies, whatever you want to call them, that relationship can last as long as the NFT lasts. Once you create that sort of micro community, you can, you can drop new merch, new items, new content, new products to that community first. I mean, you can really grow that relationship and nurture it, and use it to model the creation of overlapping and related relationships with other communities. And I think that's just really powerful. And so, they're like two paths, and I think you can travel both paths at the same time using Bitcoin. One being going super exclusive, super iconic, like cultural artifact status with people who really already get it, really passionate, are ready to put their coin where their mouth is, and at the same time, also serve and instruct a general audience, an audience of people out there who are like, well, I'm not exactly sure how this works, and I might have to learn a little bit about it. But what I do know is that I hate my 401k, and my money in the bank makes, net negative interest. And I just, I see that the IRS wants to monitor every transaction that comes in and out of my bank account. If it's over $600, people get the oogies, and the feeling of just being, you can hear the conveyor belt going, nah, as you're headed toward the mouth of this, abattoir. And it's like not a good feeling. And people are, they kind of have some, coming out of the pandemic, this feeling of having like extra time and not knowing kind of what to do with it. And like everything's, the kind of life is being slowed down artificially in some ways and sped up artificially in others. And they're just kind of like open to leadership, to being told what to do in a constructive way.
Hmm.
And and we can deliver in that way too. I got some people in the tweets are like, $600 for a book, like this is ridiculous. And it's like, well, it's not just a book, number one, and number two, if you do just want the book, then like, just step away from the keyboard until the primary market for the NFTs
right.
closes,
If
and
if
there will be
if,
books
if it
galore.
doesn't excite you, then it's not for you. If you don't see it as a exciting collectible item that's, these attributes, there's the ability to slice the market up like that is really, really powerful. And that's something you really can't do with a mass publisher, or even just self-publishing on Amazon. It's not very easy to have multiple versions of the book and multiple prints that have different price points and all that type of stuff. So
yeah, and all enclosed within Amazon Web Services anyway, which is
right,
not the
right.
way I want this to go down.
So I should end this with like a old school official sounding, like, the man is James Poulos, the book Human Forever, canonic.xyz, or something like that. What do you think? How's that work?
I love it.
Really, really get the sales pitch in there. This is absolutely awesome, James. Definitely go to canonic.xyz to check out the book. And you are on Twitter. Where's the best people if people want to follow you in general? Don't tell me we froze at the very last second of this interview. Let's see if we come back. All right. Well, if we don't come back, just search James Poulos on Twitter. I think that's it. An inglorious end to a really, really interesting interview. James, I have no idea if you can still hear me, but I'm gonna wrap it. And go to canonic.xyz, go search up James on Twitter. Oh, you're back. Okay.
I'm back.
All right. Well, that was it. I was going to end it anyway, unless you have a final send off or exhortation you want to leave everybody.
Jeez. Look, this stuff is serious, but this is also like our lives. And I've got a young son. He's going to be coming of age, over the next 5 or so years. And That generation that was born with no memory of life before the smartphone, is a special generation. And those of us who are, their parents' age and are their parents have, I think, a special responsibility to them and to our family lines, to our cultures, to our peoples, and to the human race, to preserve our memories of the before times, before the smartphone made us all cyborgs, and pass on to them a respect and a sense of the sacred around their human being and their human identity, so that, for as long as the road ahead goes, in this digital age, they look back with pride and with humility, and with a sense of, of real belonging, to the ages beforehand, and carry our humanity deep, deep, deep into the future. That's why I wrote this book, and I'm really just honored and grateful for the support that it's gotten so far, and look forward to doing my bit, as hopefully we all can do, to make sure that we are happy and human for a very long time.
Love it. James, thanks so much, man.
All right, cheers. Thanks, Isaac.